One of the craziest weather patterns of 2024 is coming to the United States over the next 10 days, and this is going to bring even more severe weather, including damaging winds, large hail, and tornadoes to the northern tier of the United States. And then on the flip side of things, we're going to be talking about a record-breaking heat wave across the eastern tier of the United States, where some areas like New York and New England could be as high as 100 degrees over the next 5 to 6 days. And also, there will be a potential for two different tropical storms to develop over the next 5 to 7 days near Florida and also near Texas. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down everything that you need to know about this crazy weather pattern that'll be impacting the United States over the next 10 days. So let's begin with a broad overview of what you can expect over the next 10 days across the United States. Beginning with today and tomorrow, we are going to continue to watch for a very active weather pattern across the central and northern plains and back into the Midwest. This is where we're going to continue to watch a battle zone of severe storms with damaging winds, large hail, and a few tornadoes, all being possible between now and perhaps all the way through the weekend, as it doesn't look like this will be winding down anytime soon. Even as we go into Wednesday into Thursday, we will continue to have the chance for severe weather from the central plains all the way back into the Midwest. Once we get closer to Friday into Saturday, notice that active weather pattern will just keep on going across the northern plains, which, by the way, is very typical for the month of June. Once we go into the weekend and eventually into next week, we could get a low pressure system developing that could actually organize, and this could bring a more organized severe weather event to the Ohio Valley and the Midwest. So just something to watch for this weekend, but by no means is this set in stone, as we are still talking about an event that's a little over 5 days out from now. In addition to this, we're also watching for a very large high pressure system and also a very strong high pressure system on the east coast of the United States. A couple of things that this will do over the next 5 days, one of which is it's going to keep a lot of areas very warm and also very dry in the Northeast, Ohio Valley, and as well as the Mid-Atlantic regions. So overall, you can expect very warm conditions and record-breaking high temperatures in a lot of those areas. Another thing that this is going to do is this could actually propel a couple of tropical systems into both Florida and perhaps even into Texas and or Mexico over the next 5 to 7 days. And we're going to talk more about this later in the forecast, but this high pressure system is setting up to be quite interesting. It's basically going to be able to propel a couple of different tropical waves into the the east coast of the United States or even in the Gulf of Mexico, and those could both pose the threat for tropical storm impacts. So something to watch for over the next 5 to 7 days back down that direction. And again, we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. Now, we are going to break this forecast into 3 different parts. We're going to begin with severe weather, then the heat wave, and then the tropical storms. We'll begin first with the severe weather threat over the next several days, and that all begins today with a large slight risk of severe weather across parts of the central and northern plains and also back into the Midwest. In addition to this, we also have a low-end threat for severe weather in the green shaded area, which is mainly for the threat of large hail and damaging winds. Now, today's event actually could be pretty big. I know it looks like, a low-end risk. It's another slight risk. We've had a lot of slight risks recently, so this is a very common trend. But we have another conditional risk today for severe weather, and what that means is that the overall confidence of there being severe weather is low, but if we do get severe weather here in Nebraska in particular, we could see some really major storms today. We could see significant tornadoes, but the thing is, we don't know if it's exactly going to happen today, because the environment right now is very favorable for all modes of severe weather. The problem right now is the cap and also all the showers and storms that are happening as we speak, at least this morning, and that could stabilize the atmosphere for the majority of today. So some uncertainty definitely remains with today. One thing we'll be watching for, though, is significant hail. We could see hail exceeding 2 to 3 inches in diameter. We actually had a storm yesterday near McCook, Nebraska that did produce upwards of softball-sized hail. That's not impossible with today's setup as well. Damaging wind threat, it's pretty balanced across the board. We'll be watching for a few flying trampolines anywhere from the Midwest back into the central and northern plains. But look at the tornado risk in particular. We do have a 5% tornado risk across parts of southwestern and western Nebraska. Now, yesterday, this was all the way back up in here. They actually shifted the risk further south for today, and that's going to include anywhere from Wisconsin back into Nebraska. Now, again, the overall concern, I think, will be the greatest here in Nebraska and maybe a sliver of northeastern Colorado if any storms do get going, because it is a very favorable environment today for there being the potential for tornadoes. We'll talk more about that here in just a second. And then the severe weather threat for tossing trampolines on Tacos Tuesday does grow a bit more. It goes anywhere from Minnesota Minnesota back into Kansas, where more damaging winds, large hail, and maybe even a couple of tornadoes will be possible. The main tornado risk will be across Minnesota, northwestern Wisconsin, and a small sliver of the Michigan Peninsula. Now, I mentioned this before, but today's environment is extremely favorable for tornadoes if any storms do get going. Look at these hodographs later today. And by the way, hodographs basically show you the spin in the atmosphere. And what we're looking at is the spin in the wind direction from the surface all the way up to the higher up part of the atmosphere. And when we get curved hodographs like this, that really indicates a very favorable environment for there being a potential, at least, for tornadoes. We have a lot of wind shear today. We have a lot of veering, and that's going to lead to an increased threat for tornadoes across parts of Nebraska. You might be thinking, it looks kind of similar back down here to the south and in Kansas, right? Well, actually not necessarily. It's not really the same sort of hodograph curve that we have back up in here in Nebraska, but we could still see a brief spit up down there. But the other thing is there probably won't be any convection down there. So a couple of reasons why further south there probably won't be much. But back over in Nebraska, anytime during the afternoon into the evening, I do think is going to be favorable for the potential for tornadoes if storms get going. Again, it's a big if for today. So over the morning, we're going to continue to watch showers and thunderstorms across Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska. This will stabilize the atmosphere for most of the afternoon, but if the atmosphere does become much more unstable later today, we will have the potential for a couple of discrete supercells. The HRRR model shows one storm up here in northern Nebraska, and that's it. It doesn't show any other storms developing, but we could see storms develop basically anywhere in Nebraska, perhaps even into northeastern Colorado, where that would be where we'd be watching for the potential for a tornado threat, very large hail, and damaging winds. Remains very uncertain. Later tonight, we'll eventually watch more of a cluster of storms develop, with significant hail being possible in South Dakota, damaging winds elsewhere, and maybe an isolated tornado or two as we go overnight into Tuesday morning. And eventually, as we go into Tuesday, we'll be watching for a new round of storms to develop back over in parts of Minnesota, and as well as back over in Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas. This is what it looks like as we go into the afternoon hours, right around 4 to 5 o'clock. A line of storms is likely to develop. Most of these storms will produce the potential for scattered damaging winds and some large hail, maybe an isolated tornado, but that threat does remain low at this time. And then eventually, as we go throughout the evening and into the overnight hours, this line of storms will push to the east, but overall, most of these storms will not really live up until the Midwest. I think a lot of the storms will weaken by the time they get closer to like central and eastern Wisconsin and Illinois. And eventually, as we go into Wednesday, things look a little bit quieter, at least for the morning hours. Now, another thing we're watching for over the next several days will be a heat wave, and this is the jet stream to give you an idea of the weather pattern that we're currently dealing with. Here's your jet stream, very strong jet stream overall back over in the northern plains. It's a meridional jet stream, which is allowing for this large-scale trough to bring the potential for showers and thunderstorms over the next several days to the Midwest and the central and northern plains. Here's that ridge, though, back over on the East Coast, which, by the way, is going to be sitting there for the next several days. And unless we get some sort of tropical disturbance like the European model is showing here back over in parts of the southeast, and there's a pretty solid chance that this heat wave is just going to continue, especially in the northeast, where record-breaking high temperatures will continue. Overall, as we go into the weekend, the jet stream is weaker, but we could get a couple of these little shortwave troughs that could bring some severe weather. But overall, that still remains uncertain at this time, as we are still looking well beyond, the next 5 days. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, the southern tier of the country looks very typical for June, where there's really not a whole lot of large-scale features bringing any sort of major severe weather outbreaks, at least areas in the southern plains, the southeast, and even parts of the lower Ohio Valley. So over the next several days, the temperature anomalies continue to show a huge air mass of very warm air, very cold air across parts of the northwest. Winter storm warnings actually in effect right now in Montana, as there will be a potential for several inches of snow. And by the way, we're in mid-June. You're not going crazy here. Once we go into Thursday into Friday, that warm air will continue to sit on the East Coast. And eventually, as we go into Monday into Tuesday, that might start to leave, but right now it still remains very uncertain at this time. And over the next several days, again, the temperatures are going to be very hot. These are the high temperatures for today. Notice areas like Texas into the low to mid 100s, even back over in the Northeast, we're going to be in the 80s and 90s, and you might be thinking that isn't super crazy, right? Well, once we go into Tuesday, the weather is going going to be hotter than me. We're going to be talking about temperatures upwards of the mid to upper 90s in the Northeast, and by Wednesday and Thursday, look at these high temperatures back over in eastern New York near Abilene. We're going to be talking about the potential for high temperatures near 100 degrees back over in parts of eastern New York, which is just absurd. Womp womp if you live in those areas. It's going to be very warm, and eventually as we go into Friday and as well as into Saturday, those temperatures do continue to stay warm anywhere from the Midwest and the East Coast back into the southern plains. We might get some relief in the Northeast by the weekend, but again, really it still remains very uncertain at this time. Honey, wake up if you're back over in the Gulf of Mexico states, as there will be a potential for 2 different tropical systems to develop over the next 5 to 7 days. We do have a high likelihood of a development area back over in the southwest Gulf of Mexico. This could develop into a tropical storm as early as Tuesday or Wednesday, and it might pose some threats to areas like Mexico and as well as Texas, where we could see some very heavy rainfall that could lead to some significant flooding. Another tropical system may develop just to the east of Florida as we go throughout the rest of this week. This is something that'll probably develop though later this week. It's a low chance as of right now, but just keep in mind if you're anywhere in like East Florida or back over into Georgia or the Carolinas, we could see some sort of tropical system develop there. Overall though, again, we're not really looking at any hurricanes as of right now. Mostly all the activity over the next 7 to 10 days would probably be more geared towards low-end tropical storms or even just tropical depressions. So for the next several days, we'll be watching for a tropical development back over in the western Gulf of Mexico. Tuesday and Wednesday is when the heaviest of the rainfall will be falling in both Mexico and Texas. The main concentration for that rainfall will be from about Galveston and Houston all the way back into parts of South Texas. Once we go into Thursday into Friday, that starts to move more to the west. We could get a tropical system to develop back over east of Florida. That still remains uncertain. The European model kind of hints at something developing early the following week back over here in the Gulf, maybe a small little tropical system, but overall, again, no hurricanes or anything like that currently in the forecast. Everything just looks to be, again, tropical depressions or maybe low-end tropical storms. The GFS model showing pretty similar stuff. Very heavy rainfall for Texas this week. Once we go into Saturday, into Sunday, and even into Monday, another tropical system. It may develop back over in the Gulf. We just don't know really where that would even be, and if it will even be anything that concerning, and if it will even happen in general. The GFS model does hint at that, though, as well. And then as we go into the mid portions of next week, the GFS model shows another tropical system developing, but again, this remains very uncertain as we are still well over 7 days out from anything like this happening. But with the current weather pattern that we have, again, that boomerang shot of tropical systems will be a possibility in the Gulf as long as the Gulf of Mexico does remain as a low shear environment for these tropical systems. And anything after that, your guess is as good as mine. We really don't know what will happen after that. Also, the rainfall across Texas, a lot of significant rainfall will happen from these tropical disturbances over the next 5 to 7 days. So again, turn around, don't drown on the roadways. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.